Welcome everybody to the First Coast Free Thought Society monthly meeting. We are an organization of individuals who enjoy science and reason over dogma and fanaticism. We've enjoyed the non-religious community of Northeast Florida since 1998, and this has been another good year for us. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Meetup, and Instagram. And Meetup is an easy way for us to facilitate announcements for our events. It's free. And if you have not joined our Meetup group, please sign up. No harm, no foul, just sign up. You'll get some notifications of what we're trying to do. We have Secular Sunday in the Park, book and movie discussion groups, the Free Thinker newsletter, and we invite your submissions to the Free Thinker newsletter. This year, we enacted an advocacy overview committee. We elected a 501(h) IRS status in addition to our 501c3 status. This year, we joined the Riverfront Parks Now coalition of community organizations. And this year, we created a new logo and regularly update our website. Our website is firstcoastfreethoughtsociety.org. Now, I do have a question. Is there anyone here who is new to us tonight? Is there anybody who has not been with us before and is willing to share? Raise your hand. Angela, I see your hand is up. Angela?
Oh, yes, I'm in the Orlando area, and I belong to the organization that Marilyn mentioned, Central Florida Free Thought Community, and I saw this event on Facebook, and I'm happy to join you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Angela. We appreciate you being here as well. Anybody else who is, and you heard about us on Facebook, because this is part of one of my questions is, how do we reach out and where is it effective and where is it not effective? Because it's fascinating that you heard about us on Facebook. Anybody else care to share? Care to share?
I'd just like to say, this is Marilyn again. I'd just like to say that I populate our Facebook page, and if your stuff is on Facebook, it goes onto our Facebook page. If it's not on Facebook, if you don't put it in the events on Facebook, then I just copy it once. If it's in the events on Facebook, it's there all the time, and it gets seen a couple of times. It's on our events page. Plus, I post it twice.
Oh, thank you, Marilyn. I had no idea you were doing that. I appreciate that. And I appreciate noting that. I'm sure Madeline's paying attention. She's a publicity. Oh my goodness, she does a great job. But thank you for that. We'll make it sure to put it in our events column on our page. There's a First Coast Free Thoughts Activist Society page on Facebook. Now, look, we're all volunteers here, yet we
activist page?
Yes.
That's a separate thing from Free Thought Society? It's another page?
It's the same thing. No, I think it's the same thing.
Oh, okay. Because otherwise I'd be searching for that.
I think it just is First Coast Free Thought Society activist page. And I don't think page is in there, but it gets to us. That I think that's what you're reading.
No. Is it the Free Thought Society page, or is there another? That's where I go. Or is there another one that's Free Thought Society activist?
Madeline?
Separate group, and I think Susan's on the call too. But there is a separate activist group that's different from our main page. But I'll put the link in the chat for you, Marilyn, and then anyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline, for clearing that up. Appreciate it. We're all.
I'd appreciate that link too, please.
Mary said okay, Madeline, you can put that in the chat and everybody can see the various links that we've got. Thank you, Madeline. I appreciate that. Hey, look, what I'm trying to say is we're all volunteers here. Everybody here is a volunteer, yet we do encourage expenses, largely promotion. Online, on the radio, and in print. And there are also associated costs for our website and fees for regulatory compliance. So if you can see your way clear to offer a donation of $20, $50, or $100 or more, you'll be part of the reason we're able to continue our public outreach. We're tremendously grateful for all those who have become members and have made donations in 2021. Without you, we wouldn't be where we are. We need you. Now, next month, Monday, December 20th, mark the date, save the date, Monday, December 20, we will enjoy our annual Human Light celebrations right here in the Zoom room. If you like, bring your favorite adult beverage of your choice and join us as we celebrate the humans and their tremendous potential. Mark the date, Monday, December 20th, right here. Check out Meetup. You'll be informed. More details there, the Zoom link and the passcode and all of those numbers on Meetup. Or you can also check us out on the First Coast Free Thought Society website. All right, Monday, December 20. Now, tonight, oh, this is so good to me. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome back Dr. David Schwam-Baird, affectionately known as Schwammy. Or sometimes the Schwammy, whose presentation is titled The Frankenstein Syndrome in Politics. Politicians, spies, and generals. Are they clever? Are they arrogant? Both or something else? Our discussion, which is always one of the best parts of the evening, will follow after David's remarks. Should you prefer, you may message a question by the Zoom chat feature. Please mute your mic until it's time to speak, and be reminded that we are recording for posterity. And everyone who wants to speak will be given ample opportunity to do so. So at this moment, let's enjoy the time, the expertise, and the insights graciously offered to us by David Schwam-Baird. Thank you, David. Please, we are all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you again for asking me to talk. It seems to be a sort of a yearly tradition that I will get up and usually talk about something that has to do with international politics. And I will be doing that again. I'm going to be a little bit more political sciencey this time because I'm going to talk about what I have called the Frankenstein Syndrome. And this is something, the first time I dealt with it with a colleague of mine, Dr. Pamela Zeisler, also in the political science department at UNF. And we wrote a conference paper about what we called the Frankenstein Syndrome. And since that time, I have done other conference papers. I published an article in an academic journal, gave talks at UNF and at other academic conferences, applying this model, this Frankenstein syndrome model, to other situations. So what I plan to do tonight is to outline what we meant by the Frankenstein syndrome. And then I have 3 different cases. I will definitely be able to get to 2. Being long-winded, I may not get to the 3rd one, but at any rate, I do have 3 different cases where this apply, and I think they're pretty fascinating. And as Ken sort of hinted, this has to do a lot with the hubris and arrogance of certain kinds of politicians, policymakers that sort of definitely overstep their capabilities and usually woefully misunderstand the situation that they're dealing with and get themselves into trouble. So I do have a PowerPoint, which I know some people find deadly, and I'm also a big map guy. So I'm going to have some maps in there. But I'm not going to linger too long on the wordy pages, but I'm putting some things up just giving you a little bit of warning there. And what I'm going to do is, after each of the cases that I outline, I'm going to stop for some clarification questions. And then at the end, general questions will certainly be welcome. So I'm going to try and share my screen. I warn you, I'm not the most adept person on earth when it comes to zooming things and computering things and stuff. I always have trouble remembering where to put the quarter in to get my computer started, but we will see if it's going to work. And already I note a problem. Let's see. Okay. Share screen. Where am I on this? Is that it? No, that can't be it. Hold on. Turn this off. Okay. Why am I not getting what I want? Okay. Oh, that was a good mistake. Hold on. Madeline, do you have the PowerPoint?
Sure, yeah, let me, give me just a second and I'll pull it up.
Okay. For some reason, I'm not getting my PowerPoint to come up, as I warned you.
Well, this is a good time, David, to do your soft.
Pardon?
This is a good time to do the soft shoe.
Yeah, yes. I prepared a couple of songs. Yeah, or maybe I can pull it up again. That's the wrong one. All right, let's see if I can do this now.
There you go. That looks good.
Ah, there we go. Okay. So, all right, is this going to work for me? Yes. Okay.
Tell me when to advance.
So, can you see it? Everybody can see this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Whoops, not ready for that yet. So, anyway, so the Frankenstein Syndrome in politics called it the hubris of dominant powers. And as I said, the very first time I went through this, I wrote a conference paper together with my colleague Pam Zeiser. And as I said, over the years, I have used this several times in several different cases. So, okay, how do I advance this? Okay. So, the idea of the Frankenstein syndrome is you have a major power, a dominant power, which very much wants to intervene in a situation, often remote geographically or very sensitive, and it can't intervene directly. It can't be seen to intervene directly, probably because it's too sensitive. They don't want to be associated with what's going on. Sometimes it's just simply because it's geographically just too far away to practically undertake some sort of mission. It could be too costly to try and go in directly, but they very much feel like they got to get involved in this situation. After that, if I go to the next one, the creature, the organization, the person that is going to become that creation, the monster, the creature that the dominant power creates already exists. There's already some group on the scene, and the dominant power focuses on that group. And the idea is this is a group that probably doesn't agree in toto with the dominant power, at least the dominant power's ultimate goals, but they have a common enemy or a common rival. And the idea is this small group will be adopted by the dominant power and built up and given resources because the dominant power hopes that this creature, this monster, this other group will actually cause trouble for the dominant power's rival, but it won't be seen to be the work of the dominant power. It'll be seen to be the work of this minor power that's already in the region. So that's the second part of it. The third part of it is the dominant power, it doesn't really care about this other group. Or if it cares about it in a limited way. And it's really only seen as a tool by the dominant power. If it becomes an ally, that would be terrific, but it's not really concerned with the future of the group that it's involved with. And then in the next segment, the dominant power supports the group, which enables the group to get stronger. But as the group gets stronger, because it has its own ideological goals, it has its own agenda, it doesn't have the same agenda as the dominant power, it starts growing and it starts pursuing its own goals. And those own goals are often at cross purposes of the dominant power's interests. And the dominant power has made the smaller group, has made this monster, this creature, strong enough to actually start attacking the dominant power's own interests, and in some case, attacking the dominant power itself. So it really has created a Frankenstein's monster according to, the model that came out of Mary Shelley's novel. It's also very important to know, okay, I got one more, that this is a deliberate strategy from the beginning. The dominant power says, okay, we're going to find that little group. They're marginal. We're going to build them up because they will attack our rival. They will do our dirty work for us. And we'll be able to control them because we're in charge or whatever. But the group gets bigger and bigger and out of hand, and then eventually turns on the creator. But it's a deliberate thing. Now, often you will read political accounts of rivalries and policies that have gone awry. I'm reading a book right now about Afghanistan, the Afghanistan papers that just came out from the Washington Post. And I've already seen 2 or 3 times that, oh, and this policy created a Frankenstein's monster when this group suddenly had power or whatever. But those were accidents. Those were byproducts. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a deliberate intent to make a certain group more powerful than it was in the hope that the dominant power can control it. So that's what the model is saying. So hopefully that makes sense so far. The best example of this that we found is something that happened in the 1980s in India. And it revolved around this fanatical Sikh activist, militant, and eventually terrorist. But it started because in India, the leading power in India, the leading political power since independence in India in 1947 was the Congress Party. Nehru was the leader of the Congress Party on independence. Nehru was a very well-known, very well-respected political leader. But eventually, Indira Gandhi became the leader of the Congress Party. And by the time you got to the 1970s, the Congress Party, like any party that's been in power too long, that's just used to power and assumes it's going to stay in power, becomes corrupt, becomes arrogant, becomes lazy, and becomes in love with the power that they have. And things will eventually start to fall apart and get out of their control. In a part of India called the Punjab, let's see if we can get the next screen. Here's a map of India, and north of New Delhi, the capital, you see the city of Amritsar. Amritsar is an important city in the Punjab province of India. It's the holiest city. It's where the Golden Temple and a major temple compound is, and that's going to be sort of the focus, the geographical focus. But with the next map, you can sort of see where it is. The Punjab is in northern India. It's on the border with Pakistan. In the Indian Punjab, there are about 28 million people. Close to 60% are Sikhs, of the Sikh religion. 38.5% are Hindus, and then there are other minorities. There are Buddhists, there are Christians, there are Muslims, there are Jains, and other groups. It's important to note that on the Pakistani side of the border, there's a very large region also called Punjab, which is 95% Muslim, but all of these people speak the same language, it has their same culture. But in India, the Punjab is a state with a Sikh majority. So in 1977, the Congress Party suffered defeats in elections around the country, and a Sikh national party called the Akali Dal, which means the Eternal Party or the Eternal Army or the Eternal Force, won the elections in the Punjab and defeated the Congress Party in the Punjab. And the Congress Party also had problems in other parts of the country. So after that defeat, the Congress Party leadership were very desperate to try and get power back in the Punjab. And in order to do that, they had to somehow weaken their main rival, the Akali Dal, this centrist Sikh nationalist party. So if I can have the next thing, there's a picture of the Golden Temple in Amritsar, the most important temple in this complex of temples. So on the next screen, we have, okay, the Punjabi Akali Dal governs from 77 to 80. And then after that, the Punjabi Congress Party wants to weaken the Akali Dal, and the National Party wants to also get involved in that. This is the next thing. Now, there is this very, very small marginal group called the Dal Khalsa, the Purity Party or the Purity Force, led by that man Bhindranwala, the man whose picture I showed you. And not only do they want Sikh, not necessarily independence, but much more Sikh autonomy in the Punjab, they are also very much against the mainstream leadership of the Sikh community, which they accuse of backsliding. They accuse them of not being true to Sikh roots, and their claim is that too many Sikhs are starting to sort of drift into a practice that is more Hindu than it is Sikh. The Sikh religion is sort of a syncretistic religion, a mixed religion with Hindu and Muslim roots, if you can believe that. That's a whole nother lecture. But the practice, according to the extremists, of far too many of the Sikhs in Punjab is getting very lax and becoming more and more like the practice of Hinduism. And they want to stop that. So the Congress leaders start to channel funds to Bhindranwala's group, this radical group, under the table. Secretly, they are giving them funds in the hope that they will grow a little bit and start to pull some support away from the Akali Dal, the main Sikh party. And it doesn't matter if you have two Sikh parties, as long as they split the vote of the Sikh community, that's going to work to the advantage of the Congress Party. Now, what makes this particularly interesting is one of the two people who's behind this strategy. One of the people is a man named Jarnail Jani Singh, who is a Punjabi leader of the Congress Party. But the other person who is behind this scheme is Sanjay Gandhi, who is Indira Gandhi's son. Indira Gandhi is the Prime Minister of India and the leader of the Congress Party. And her son is very much involved in Congress Party politics. He's a member of the parliament, but he's also, shall we say, an organizer. So Sanjay Gandhi is a very big part of this scheme. So they start to give money to Bhindranwala. And at first he's leading protests and making speeches and recruiting people. But then they start physically attacking, including assassinating Sikhs, especially prominent Sikhs who they believe are backsliding, who they believe are not true to the Sikh tradition. And then as time goes on, they also start attacking Hindus. The reason that they start attacking Hindus, including assassinating Hindus in the Punjab, is that they hope to create a panic so that Hindus will leave Punjab, and also create tension in other parts of India so that Punjabis living outside of the Punjab will move back to the Punjab, either through fear or because they're excited because this radical activity is happening in Punjab. So it's getting a little complicated, but finally, getting more bold, members of the Khalsa Dal take their arms, stockpile arms inside of the holy compound at Amritsar. This is the holiest place in the Punjab and the holiest place for the Sikh religion. So now they are representing a security threat, a serious security threat to India. So this isn't exactly where Sanjay Gandhi wanted this to go. But then, moving on, the Indian army eventually is sent in to attack Bhindranwala's forces in the holy compound in Amritsar, in something called Operation Blue Star, which results in hundreds of soldiers and hundreds of Sikh militants killed, and other civilians are also killed and wounded, and the holy compound is damaged. And what this does is this creates anger throughout the Sikh community, moderates as well as radicals, and they start protesting like crazy. And there are protests and riots in the army. It's important to point out that the Sikhs make up about 4% of the population of India, but they make up about 10% of the population of the army. They are a group with a very strong military tradition, and they are also generally very Indian. They're patriotic Indian, but they want more, a little bit more home autonomy for the most part. So you have these riots, these protests, if I can move on. And there's even a mutiny of new Sikh recruits in the Indian army. Several hundred Sikh soldiers mutiny, and they have to be put down actually by other Sikh soldiers in the army. But this has really totally gotten out of hand. Now, what makes it the perfect case of a Frankenstein story is that in the end, Indira Gandhi, Sanjay Gandhi's mother, Prime Minister of India, is assassinated by her personal Sikh bodyguards. So it has come around, and this attempt to create this radical Sikh movement ends up with the assassination of Sanjay Gandhi's mother and the leader of his political party that he was actually trying to serve. So to me, that is sort of the ultimate example of this arrogant kind of policy. Yeah, we can control the little guys, we can cause trouble for our rivals, we'll keep it all under control. And eventually the monster they created comes back and kills their own leader. So anyway, and of course there were anti-Sikh riots that broke out all over India too, creating more unrest. So that is the first example of this policy, the Frankenstein Syndrome, and how it works. So at any rate, I was going to stop temporarily and see if there are any questions or clarifications now. Madeline, if you could stop the screen share for a moment, because I think you have control. So anyway, that's the first example, which I found very dramatic. Pam and I both found it extremely dramatic. And it seems to fit that particular model that we put together very well.
Anybody have a question for David, a comment, a statement? You know, anybody want to comment about how peaceful we all think Sikhs are and why the turbans are often confused with other people who are more violent? What is it about the Sikhs, David, that we think are peaceful people, yet they are assassination?
Right. Well, the Sikhs actually see themselves, part of their identity is as having a strong military tradition. And you know, it's not just the males not cutting their beards and their hair and wearing the turban, but it's also very important ritually for them to carry around swords. Which has created some problems, you know, when we talk about separation of church and state in the United States, and there are Sikh communities, and if some of the boys in a school, after they reach puberty, they want to be able to carry these ritual swords, and they are ritual swords. But it's not so much that they are not fighters. They're very proud of their military tradition, but they're not extremists. They don't have a reputation for being extremists. And the Akali Dal party, the main nationalist party, if you will, of the Sikhs, is actually a conservative party, and they don't preach revolution. They just want more autonomy for Sikh culture in the Punjab in India. So, you know, it's a little bit confusing because they do have that military tradition, but they don't have an extremist position.
Fred.
They're not known for extremism.
I just have a question. Did the people of the Punjab can they divide themselves during the partition of India after the British left and
oh yes,
violent massive wars of 47, 48 or so?
Oh, yeah, definitely. As I said, the overwhelming majority of people in the Indian state of Punjab are either Sikh or Hindu. It's like almost 2/3 Sikh and almost 1/3 Hindu. Less than 2% of the population is Muslim. On the other side of the border, which is, there are many more, there are 120 million Punjabis in Pakistan, and the Punjabis in Pakistan are 95% Muslim, and there was a huge exchange of population. By exchange of population, I don't mean, oh, here's your ticket on the train to go to the other side of the border where you'll be more comfortable. There was murder, mayhem, pillage, terrorism. It was not nice and clean, but millions of Hindus and Sikhs left what became Pakistan. Millions of Muslim Punjabis left India to go to Pakistan.
Similar to what happened in Greece and Turkey after
Yeah,
after World War One.
right. It's a very similar thing. Whenever you talk about population exchanges, especially if you are unhistorical enough to say, oh, that would be a good solution to this particular ethnic or national problem. Every time there's been a population exchange in recent memory, it's always been nasty and bloody and unfortunate. So, and this is a good case of that. But that was before this. This is talking about internal Sikh politics and how it overlays on national Indian politics.
Very well.
Pardon?
Couple of questions. Been a while since I've, been aware of what was going on in India. And I was wondering, what the timeline is. When was Indira Gandhi's death?
Indira Gandhi was killed in, was it 1984? I believe. So this policy had started around 1980 or a little before 1980.
Okay, I don't know if this is our topic or not, but I guess India historically had trouble with Pakistan. I'm wondering, I guess maybe what the current situation is there in terms of, I guess, India and the relation to Pakistan and the events that are happening there now.
Right. The events that are happening there now in Pakistan, and that's my third story is going to concern that a little bit. The main problems aren't so much with the Punjabis, who are the largest single group in Pakistan. It's with the Pashtun, who make up about 15% of the population of Pakistan. So when you're talking about what's going on in Pakistan and the crisis in Pakistan, some of the crisis is between the different groups, like the Punjabis and the Sindh and the Baloch and the Pashto. I'm throwing all these terms at you. But the real crisis, and like I said, that's my third story, is with a different group in Pakistan. It's with the Pashtun.
That would be interesting. I guess third question I have, and I don't know if this is covered in your third example or not, but I'm wondering, I guess a couple months ago it was more or less in the news that India was suffering quite badly from the pandemic, and I'm wondering if that has any effect on anything in terms of politics in India or anything.
Oh, it certainly does have a lot to do with politics, and it has a lot to do with the ruling party right now, which is called the BJP. Don't ask me to pronounce it in Hindi. But the BJP under Prime Minister Modi at first seemed to be doing well with the COVID crisis, and then he started losing his grip, and currently he's losing support for that and for other reasons. But Modi, I would describe as a Hindu fundamentalist who is responsible for whipping up strong anti-Muslim feelings in the country in a populist way, you know, to use it as a political weapon, which is very unfortunate because there are over 100 million Muslims in India. So that shouldn't be allowed to happen, but that's what has been happening. But that doesn't so much involve the Punjabis. That's a different fight or a different
Okay.
political problem.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'll, I I might have another question later, but I'll wait until I hear the third segment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, David, why don't you go on with your next points?
Then I will go on with my next points. So I will, if Madeline will give me the screen back, there we go. So now we have Frankenstein in Colombia. And okay. So Colombia, okay, I'm going to start out this section because there's a lot of, this is more complicated, but it has to do with America's war on drugs in South America, which is, of all of the international political policies I studied in the 20th century, probably the closest to a perfect failure of policy, the overall war on drugs. But I'm talking about a very, very specific part of the American war on drugs in Colombia, a very specific aspect of that. But I'm going to start out by talking about a trip to Peru that I made back, I think in 2005. First time I was in Peru. And I was with a trip from the university with a lot of students, and we went from Lima, Peru. We flew up to Cusco, and Cusco is very high in the Andes Mountains. And when we got off the plane in Cusco, we got on buses we're taking directly to the hotel. And when we got into the hotel, before we even checked into our rooms, they took all of us into the dining room and gave all of us coca tea made from coca. And the reason they did that is because for hundreds and hundreds of years, the locals used the leaves of the coca plant for fighting altitude sickness. And that was a real problem on our trip. For fighting hunger, you chew on coca leaves and it sort of kills your hunger for a while, or if you have a toothache or a headache, you chew on coca leaves and that helps you with whatever's bothering you. So one of the problems with the fight against cocaine is derived from the coca leaves, but you need like, a half a ton of coca leaves to produce maybe a pound of cocaine. So if you just take the coca leaf, that's like an aspirin, that's strong. But the locals, especially the local Indians, and I'm using the term Indians because that's what you say in Latin America. You don't say Native Americans. They say Indians, Indios, and that's what they call themselves. But at any rate, the Indians have been using coca for hundreds and hundreds of years on a normal basis for just regular anesthetic kind of things, like one would use aspirin. So one of the many problems of our war on drugs is when you're asking these peasants to destroy coca because it's so dangerous, they're saying, dangerous? It cures toothaches? That's dangerous. Cures your altitude sickness? That's dangerous. So you're fighting that. The other thing you're fighting is that for many of the peasants, many of the people in the countryside who are extremely poor, being able to grow coca leaves for the international drug trade, they're not the ones who refine it into cocaine. They're the ones who get paid by the various traffickers to produce it. They don't get a big cut, but they make more money producing that than they can produce, than they can get producing anything else. So once again, when the government comes and says, hey, you got to destroy this, they're saying, why do we have to destroy it? It's not dangerous. A, we use it all the time. And B, it's the only thing that makes it possible for us to eat. Oh, okay. So problems in fighting the drug trade, that's just the very beginning of it. But at any rate, in Colombia, we had two main concerns. Since the 1940s, there have been guerrilla groups fighting against the government in Colombia because the establishment parties essentially froze out any party that was representing either peasants or representing urban workers. And so they rebelled when the two main parties sort of made a deal cutting everybody out. And then as the Cold War heated up, several of those rebel groups gravitated toward a sort of Fidelista style Marxist ideology. Fidelista meaning Cuba, Fidel Castro, that's where it comes from. And so it became a major part of the Cold War. And so you had several Marxist guerrilla groups, rivals with each other, but all fighting the government. The most important were the FARC, FARC, Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarios de Colombia, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. And the other one is the ELN, Ejército de Liberación Nacional, the Army of National Liberation. Those are the two biggest groups. And they managed to hold on and continue fighting after almost all of the other Cuban-inspired revolutionary groups had disappeared or made their peace with the regimes that they were fighting, like the FLN in, the FMLN in El Salvador, groups like that. And they were still holding out as late as the 1990s and early 2000s. So the United States was interested in helping the Colombian government fight those Marxist guerrillas. And even though I'm focusing on the excesses and the human rights violations of government forces, the FARC and the ELN did their share of human rights abuses as well. So I'm not trying to defend them or whitewash them, but we're talking about, we're focusing on the government. So that was one thing. The other thing was the cocaine trade. And as early as 1971, President Nixon started talking about a war on drugs, picked up again under the Reagan administration in 1982. And as time went on, millions and eventually billions of dollars were poured into Colombia, both to fight the guerrilla groups and to fight the cartels. Okay, so far so good. Now, if we move on, you may have heard of a man named Pablo Escobar. He was a colorful leader of the largest of the drug cartels in Colombia. And it's very important to focus on him and on the American effort to destroy him. Escobar and some of the other drug lords in Colombia, it's hard for us to imagine this, but they had sort of cultivated a Robin Hood persona. So people like Pablo Escobar, yeah, they were making gazillions of dollars selling cocaine, mainly to the United States, but also to Europe. But they also ingratiated themselves to people in the countryside. They would fund soccer teams for teenagers and build the soccer field and give the kids uniforms. They would put in clinics. They would provide services that the government weren't providing the poor in the rural countryside. And so that's why they were seen as sort of these Robin Hood types. Now, you can't overdo that because they were still ruthless. And if you were growing coca for them and you said, you know what, Pablo, I want to get out of this business. Well, you would soon have a pistol to your head and say, you might want to reconsider getting out of the business. So it wasn't all wonderful, lovely things, but still they did have this sort of Robin Hood kind of aura around them. For many groups, including plantation owners, the plantation owners hated the Marxist guerrillas because the Marxist guerrillas would burn the plantations, or they would kidnap wealthy plantation owner family members and get ransom in order to raise money and strike fear in the hearts of people. And they also often were at odds with the drug cartels. So there were some wealthy plantation owners that started hiring their own self-defense people. But there were also peasant villages that felt themselves caught in the middle. The government would come in and say, oh, you better not be dealing with the drug dealers or you're going to get in trouble. Or you better not be dealing with the FARC or the ELN or we're going to shoot you. And then the FARC or the ELN would come into town and they'd say, oh, you better not be dealing with the government or we're going to see you as traitors and we could shoot some of you too. And so between the plantation owners who were already hiring their own bodyguards and their own little militias that came to be known as paramilitaries, the United States was encouraging the Colombian government and the Colombian army to start organizing self-defense organizations in the various villages. So you had a large umbrella organization called Autodefensas de Colombia, AUC, started by a man named Carlos Castaño, and he brought these private armies together. He was urging the army to help form these self-defense units. But the people who were controlling the self-defense units, including people from the army, were also infusing them with this strong anti-communist ideology. And in the vernacular of the Colombian government and Colombian army and the United States, anybody who said, hey, we have to worry about peasant rights. Hey, we have to worry about stopping mining companies from taking land from the Indians. Hey, they were all communists. If you were criticizing the government, you were automatically a communist. Now, there were communists, there were Marxist guerrillas, but any dissenter was sort of put in that group. And eventually, not only the army and the police units being trained by the United States, but the paramilitaries that they were founding with money from the United States and arms from the United States began to commit human rights abuses themselves. And eventually the paramilitaries started growing. And one of the interesting things is the paramilitaries decided, you know, we like cooperating with the army, we like cooperating with the police force, but we also want political independence. How do you get political independence in Colombia? How do you get it if you're the FARC? How do you get it if you're a paramilitary? You get it by growing and selling coca, growing and selling cocaine. So the paramilitaries that the United States encouraged the Colombian army to form eventually became another drug trafficking organization. And they started to grow. And eventually in the 1990s, the Human Rights Watch started reporting that the paramilitaries were responsible for more human rights abuses than government forces and guerrillas combined. They became vicious. They became very much involved in drug trafficking. By the way, this feeds into what I said before. The American policy in the 1990s had been to try and catch people like Pablo Escobar, catch other heads of cartels in a policy called decapitation. If you could get Pablo Escobar, the leader of one of the cartels, get the leader of one of the other cartels, get the leader of the major cartels, they would fall apart. No, that was a total misunderstanding of how the cartels worked in Colombia. The cartels were actually federations of a group that did trafficking, a group that did growing, a group that did refining, a group that did smuggling. And so by getting rid of the leaders, you just diffuse the power of these various groups throughout the country. And eventually the paramilitaries were much better at taking over these different groups than the already existing players in the field. So what we eventually did was create a new narco trafficking organization that became even more powerful than the ones we were trying to fight. And just to top it all off, what's interesting is by the 1990s, early 2000s, the president of Colombia from 2002 to 2010, a man named Alvaro Uribe, there were some problems with him, but what he did was he came up with a program to disarm the paramilitaries and the guerrillas. And he would offer amnesties, and members of the FARC or members of the paramilitaries would come in and they would turn in their arms and they would go get training to work in a legitimate business or something like that. And they've got several thousand paramilitaries and guerrillas to disarm. But most of the people involved in the paramilitaries and in the guerrillas essentially said, it doesn't matter. We'll still have a better living if we stay with our groups and continue to be involved in drug trafficking. And so now you have the paramilitaries as the largest single group. Well, it's not a single group. There are several groups. They broke up into a dozen different organizations, but they're all over the country. They are fighting government forces, the government forces that created them in the first place, and they're still doing business. And cocaine is still coming into the United States, mainly from Colombia. Colombia no longer smuggles it into the United States. They stopped doing the smuggling. Now the smuggling is going through Central America, which is why Central America is such a mess. And we have tens of thousands of people from Guatemala and Nicaragua and El Salvador trying to get into the United States. So the war on drugs overall was a brilliant success, as you can see. But this very specific part of it, the creation of these autodefensas, the AUC, by creating them, the United States actually ended up creating organizations that were worse than the ones that already existed in the first place when we got involved in the war on drugs back in the 1980s. So that sounds to me like a Frankenstein's monster also. So Madeline, if you could take it off the screen for a moment, we'll see if there's any other questions about that. But I would like you to see how it fits into this Frankenstein syndrome. We deliberately created the AUC, which eventually became exactly the opposite of what we wanted in Colombia. You're muted, Ken.
I'm muted, I'm sorry. Comments or questions? Mary, did you have one, or somebody had their hand up? Oh, Roger, let's go to Roger. Roger's muted. Roger, you're muted.
I have a question or comment. I mean, is there any way out of this that you see, or any attempt to get us extricate ourselves from resolve this mess we made?
Well, resolving it would have to involve a fundamental change in our quote war on drugs. As I said, of all of the foreign policies, and we've had a lot of foreign policy failures, I think this is closest to a perfect failure that we have had. And the Frankenstein syndrome that I'm talking about is just one feature of the overall failure. But we have not stopped the production of drugs. Every time the United States announces, oh, cocaine production has gone down in Colombia. Yeah, as soon as it goes down in Colombia, it goes up in Peru. As soon as it goes down in Peru, it goes up in Bolivia. As soon as it goes down in Bolivia, it goes up in Western Brazil, and it keeps going around and around. We have not stopped the production of cocaine in South America. We just have not. And the State Department every year publishes an account on how successful our policy is, but the production just moves around. Yeah, we damped it down in Colombia really well. Yeah, but now it's up in Bolivia. So you have to fundamentally say this isn't the way to do it. And I'd just like to point out that Afghanistan is high in the news. Afghanistan produces 90% of the opium and heroin in the world. And guess what? We're using the same policy to try and stop the heroin production in Afghanistan that works so well in Colombia since 1982. And okay, so in Colombia, the 80s, 90s, aughts, and 2000 teens, 40 years, essentially no change. That's a good policy, right? We've really defeated the drugs.
Thank you, Dave. Very supply and demand, right? How do you stop?
Yeah.
How do you stop a supply when the demand is so great? You can't stop it in one country if it's a global demand. So maybe you can talk to that late afterwards. But let's go to Roger right now. Roger Curry.
Yes, how is everyone tonight? I hope everyone's well. I was in Bolivia and Peru in 2000, and I think that this was right about the end of the when the Shining Path were operating in Peru, and then in I only visited Colombia one time, and that was to the Bogota airport, which was a terrible experience. But the coca tea, yes, I've had it in Bolivia. Matter of fact, in Bolivia, I was 3,000 feet higher than in Cusco. So going downhill to Cusco was a relief for my respiratory system.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But,
just an aside there, I remember in Cusco in the hotel, I noticed behind the reception desk, they had oxygen tanks.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I was wondering, hey, what's that for? And I came down once, from my room in the evening, and I saw this poor Korean businessman just in total agony with a mask on, trying to breathe. And his friends were, it's going to be okay. It's going to be, I assume that's what they were saying in Korean, but he had the mask on. He was suffering from altitude sickness, something awful.
Right.
So that's what the coca tea is for. And most of us didn't have a problem. I had a little headache, but I think the coca tea helped.
Yeah, I'd even gotten a prescription for Diamox, which is used for high altitude treatment. But I was wondering, there was, if I've got the name correctly, I believe it was Betancourt that was captured by she was a,
Right. She was a politician. She was dual citizen, French and Colombian,
yes,
but
right.
she had been a member of the Colombian Congress, and she was captured by the FARC, I believe, one of the Marxist guerrilla groups, and kept captive for, I can't remember how long, but like 16
Several
months or
years.
something,
Yeah.
or several years before
Yeah.
she was finally released. Right, but the FARC and the ELN were not particularly nice guys. And one of the interesting things about the FARC and the ELN, the FARC used to get support from Cuba, because Cuba was interested in fostering, Marxist revolution in Latin America. And then when Gorbachev came to power in the mid 80s, he essentially said to the Cubans, okay, the gravy train's over. We're not supporting this so much. So the monies and supplies started to dry up. And so the FARC said, our only choice to stay in business is to get into the drug business. So the guerrillas also got into the drug business. So the Marxist guerrillas were doing drugs. The cartels that had existed, like under Pablo Escobar, were doing drugs. And the AUC, the group that I was talking about, the paramilitaries, also got into drugs. And so, that was the way to go for any group in Colombia to survive, to keep whatever their struggle going, their business going, etc. So it was a holy mess down there.
Just for curiosity's sake, how much inroads have the synthetics like the OxyContin and the fentanyl had on the demand for cocaine in the U.S.?
To a certain extent, that creates a new competition, both for cocaine and heroin. But from what I understand, and I haven't been following it as closely in the last couple of years as I had before, but from what I understand, since almost all of the drug trade for the longest time from Latin America to the United States was based on cocaine and marijuana, first, in Mexico, they also started growing heroin because they were competing with heroin producers in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia. And then they started getting into the synthetic drug business. I mean, they're not going to give up their multi-billion-dollar trade. And so as good capitalist entrepreneurs, they're going to say, hey, it's time to branch out from cocaine and heroin and into meth and into other things. So they've got the money and the expertise and the wherewithal to do that. So you're seeing more synthetic drugs coming up. Meth is produced widely in certain parts of the United States. The Mexican cartels are not going to be left behind.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Let's go to Susan and Earl. Susan and Earl?
Did they raise their hands?
Yeah, their hands are up. At least I see their hands. Maybe
No,
they're not. Oh,
I keep pressing on my screen thinking it's touchpad for it's the computer, and it's like it's not working. So you said the United States is funding AUC, and I'm part of the United States, and I don't feel like I funded it. So I want to know exactly who in the United States is responsible for this. We discussed this a little bit in the movie group when we talked about Charlie Wilson's War and how the CIA can influence funding. And so how does, this might be for a whole nother talk for you, but how does this funding get approved and pushed? And also what I hear you saying is that we caused a lot of, a lot of people are coming here from Central America, and we have maybe added to the disruption in their countries. And if I correctly understood you, and then I also think I understand you to say that the whole war on drugs might be a really bad idea, not only for other countries, but for our countries as well. And then why do Muslims are okay with heroin, but not for alcohol? So that's all I have.
All right, David. I hope you were taking notes, David.
Yeah,
Go.
yeah.
You got
Okay,
6 questions.
Okay. As quickly as possible, if I can remember all of these questions. So there are various things. I mean, Congress has openly appropriated funds for the war on drugs, but you have both the military and the Department of Defense and the CIA, which work with the Colombian military. Now, the Colombian military, like many of the militaries we work with, are a mixed bag, and some of them are on the level, and you know they want to serve their country or whatever, and some of them are as corrupt as hell. So a lot of the arms that we gave for certain specific purposes were given to the groups that actually let's say the more violent or the less upright parts of the Colombia military were interested in giving them to. So they made sure a lot of the aid that we gave to them, not necessarily meant to get to the AUC, was going to get to the AUCs anyway, although we were encouraging the creation of the self-defense leagues. But we knew the corruption was going on. We knew that a lot of the aid that we sent for one purpose was being used for another purpose. And once again, there were groups in the United States. You know, the right hand doesn't always know what the left hand is doing, and sometimes the left hand is doing the wrong thing. But the United States was also aware, different agencies in the United States were also aware of the abuses, the human rights abuses, and there were even fights between agencies. There were fights between the DEA and the CIA, where the DEA was saying, we can't support these people who are encouraging human rights abuses. And I'm not sure if it was the CIA or certain parts of the Defense Department establishment that didn't care. And they said, the important thing is fighting communism. And again, the definition of communist was anybody who criticizes the government or demands rights for the peasants. It wasn't just the FARC or just the ELN. So there were disputes inside of the United States among agencies. There were some agencies that didn't like the way the policy was going. They didn't oppose the policy altogether. And part of my argument is the policy altogether was still misguided. We still thought we were going to achieve something with the self-defense organizations that we should have known better. We weren't going to achieve, especially with the way the Army was trying to get them enlisted in fighting the communists and violating human rights. But there wasn't 100% satisfaction among the people who were even carrying out the policies. So, and I can't remember what the last question, why are Muslims not allowed to have alcohol, but are allowed to have or deal with things like heroin or opium, which has long been used in that part of the world. There are different interpretations and disagreements among Muslims themselves. There are specific things that refer to wine in the Quran that I know about, that you're not supposed to drink wine. And depending on who your imam is, that doesn't count opium or it counts any kind of intoxicant. So there are disagreements. And I know that's surprising that that would exist in a large religious organization. But, you know, different interpretations, but for a long time, opium has been widely used in parts of Central Asia and the Middle East. So,
Yeah. Thank you for that, David. I'm reminded of Jen Psaki. You know Jen Psaki, the press secretary of the White House, and what they do in the White House is they allow one question and a follow-up, and that's a perfect way to go because everybody gets a chance to speak, and then you know and I think she's doing a great job, and somehow this exchange made me think of Jen Psaki. I appreciate it. Let's go to Mary Wall. Mary Wall.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to comment. Maybe it's, you know, unnecessary. You know, judging by your conversation, you're probably aware that, you know, this in the first place. But I guess years ago, the United States used to use the military to back, you know, repressive governments in Latin America in order to, I guess, you know, back up corporations so Americans could get cheaper prices. And, you know, ended up repressing the native farmers and stuff like that. Various times, I guess the United States has tried to, I guess, make some sort of monetary help to places, maybe like Liberia, where basically, I guess somebody big oil wanted to drill or whatever, but, you know, repeatedly, or the WTO as well, and I guess South Africa, you know, the WTO, I guess, tried to contribute some funds, I guess, to upgrade, you know, electrical or whatever. It all ended up in the hands of lovely landowners. And, you know, in Liberia, you know, the government ended up with it. It never ended up in the hands of the, you know, the natives or whatever. So, at any rate, they brought to school the Americas and stuff like that. And basically, America used to use its military to back, you know, corporations or whatever. That, I guess, in terms of changes in financial situations and global outlook, in terms of, you know, the existence of multinationals and stuff, no longer works. So we're not basically militarily in the position we used to be, and that's one of the factors, I guess, affecting you know, America today. But even in terms of the FDA, I've noticed some things that are questionable, and, you know, stuff like that. Even the opioid crisis and Purdue Pharmacy or whatever, the Sacklers, you know, I guess I noticed right off, you know, when they announced the war on drugs, that more or less was backfired, you know, tremendously. But so at any rate, you know, there are more problems than just this drug thing. You know, I guess there's always been addicts. You know, personally, I've been, you know, sort of afraid about maybe the cartels in Mexico, you know, ending up invading the United States or something, but, you know, whatever.
okay, well, you know, one of the things you have to realize is the United States, in some ways, is as far as foreign policy goes, is a split personality, because and split 3 or 4 different ways. You know, there have been occasions when we have done things that were meant to help other people, that actually did help other people. And we use some of the organizations to do that. The World Bank managed to almost eliminate malaria in Africa, and you know, do other things. So there is an impulse in American foreign policy on the part of some of the population and some of the functionaries of the government to actually do good things. That's one thing. There are a lot of things that we do that are directly meant to benefit corporations, and it's always put in rosy terms, but those corporations are the ones that are going to benefit. And then there are other things like, you know, the idea of fighting the war on drugs, just to say, oh, we've got a drug problem and it destroys lives and it's a horrible thing and we have to fight it. Well, that doesn't really sound bad. That's not a bad goal. The question is, how good or how stupid or how ineffectual is your policy in the end? So you can also have a good result that you want to get, that's truly good, and do exactly the wrong thing in order to achieve it. And I think that's what happened in the war on drugs. It was totally wrong. totally didn't make sense, totally goes against all the logic, all the experience that we've ever had. And we keep up with it. We're still doing it. You know,
Yeah, I sort of know that, basically the ugly American, come in and rescue us. Like basically we're in Iraq, got rid of Saddam Hussein, and promptly the Shiites and the Sunnis started fighting with each other. So
Yeah.
imposing democracy on somebody, basically somebody else, doesn't always work. And basically, Bill Clinton, outsourcing jobs. It was supposed to, I guess, create markets here by, making other economies better. Well, basically the Chinese seem to use it to kick us in the butt. So anyway, I don't really totally believe all the guilt trips. It really isn't any sort of self-preservation to do so, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say this before I go on, but since you brought that up, Mary, I'm reading a book right now which might be of interest to you. It's exactly on this. It's called The True Flag by Stephen Kinzer, and it's mainly about when the United States, the very first time the United States had a national, I won't say discussion, it's more like an argument, debate, fight about whether or not the United States should become an imperialist power or not. And it focuses on Theodore Roosevelt and Mark Twain and the events of 1898. That was the war with Spain when we took Cuba and Puerto Rico and Guam and the Philippines from Spain, and also annexed Hawaii, which was an independent country in the same year. But all of those issues come together and you sort of see the roots of it. So I would recommend that book, The True Flag by Stephen Kinzer. And that sort of gets into the issues that you're talking about. It's sort of the historical beginning of that in a way. So anyway.
Yeah, I have my own personal thought on that, is that basically it's the human mind, America, any place else in the world, really prepared for, I guess, omnipotence in terms of technological advancement, even 5G, surveillance, whatever. Personally, it's brought a lot of creature comforts, technology or whatever, but in terms of one's own power, well, one can be nasty or whatever, but, basically humanity is more or less going to be that way, but the curtailing of basically omnipotence, would tend to curtail the amount of damage that humanity can actually do itself. So, I tend to question whether these advances in technology, even existence of polio vaccine. Well, that was good. You wouldn't want to throw that away, but in terms of omnipotence, how far can one go in terms of nuclear warfare or something? So I'm not really sure it's possible to put the genie back in the bottle, but there's been Christian Science in terms of medicine, the Amish, the Native American was far more adapted to, I guess, ecologically to the environment than technology. But anyway, I just question it. So whatever.
Okay, well, all of those are important points, although we're sort of getting away from the specific theme. So unless there's another question about Colombia.
Let's move on, David. Let's move on. You got a third part to this, and then I've got. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so my third one is Pakistan's deadly creation. And I'm talking about the Taliban. Now, one of the things I want to say, we had a discussion in the movie group about this when we were talking about Charlie Wilson's War, the movie. If I was talking about the Frankenstein syndrome and, just gave you the bare minimum of it, the first thing a lot of people think about is, oh, Al-Qaeda. Oh, that's a perfect example. It's not an example of what I'm talking about. Al-Qaeda was one of dozens of groups that was fighting. It's not an Afghanistani group. They were often called the Afghan Arabs because the core of Al-Qaeda, the core of bin Laden's group, were Arabs that were recruited from other countries to come fight the Soviets. And there were people from other Muslim countries too, from Indonesia, from Chechnya, from a variety of different countries. But they were a small group in Afghanistan fighting the Soviets in the 1980s. And some of our money probably got to them, but we didn't necessarily even know it. They were not the group we were focusing on. What's interesting in the Pakistan situation, again, this was an American policy in two parts, maybe three. And all of the parts were done stupidly, even if you agreed that it was worthwhile supporting the Afghanis and trying to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. And the Soviets were nasty, brutal, horrible, disgusting people violating human rights with impunity, and they were just horrible, horrible, horrible. And it may well have been a good idea to help them. We don't have to argue that now. The way that we did it was stupid and counterproductive for us, and that laid the groundwork for something else. And I'm only talking about this really as an introduction to Pakistan, because I'm really talking about Pakistan. The mistake we made in the 1980s during the Reagan administration, which was a stupid, stupid, stupid mistake, was we said, we want to help, we want to get arms and supplies to the Mujahideen, which was a catch-all term. A mujahid is somebody who fights in a jihad. You can hear the word jihad in here, mujahid. So the mujahideen, that's plural in Arabic for fighters of the jihad. But that's what all of the groups that were fighting the Soviets were called. And on this map that you see now, Turkestan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan were all part of the Soviet Union then. So there was a big border with the Soviets there. And so there were all sorts of groups fighting. Most of the groups were very conservative, religious Muslim groups, but some of them, they didn't have any agenda other than get the damn Soviets out of our country. They might have been very, very religious, but they didn't have a religious political agenda. They had sort of a national agenda. They had a save our region, save our tribe, save our people agenda. Some were predisposed to be pro-United States. It was an amalgam. So what we did stupidly was we said, we don't have that much intelligence on the ground. And Pakistan said, hey, give us the supplies you want to get to the Mujahideen. We know the territory in Afghanistan. We know who's fighting what. We'll do this for you. And we stupidly said, oh, what a wonderful idea. And the dictator, Zia-ul-Haq of Pakistan, who was a conniving thief and totally wrapped us around his finger, he took our money. He gave over 50% of all of the aid that we funneled through him, aside from what he took off the top, to a group called the Hizb-i-Islami, the Army of Islam, under a man named Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who spent as much time fighting other Mujahideen groups, including those that were more predisposed to be friendly to, or at least cooperative with, the United States. He spent as much time fighting other moderate Mujahideen as he did fighting the Soviets. And that was where over half of all of our $1 billion of aid went, because they felt, or Zia-ul-Haq felt, that we'll supply Hekmatyar's army, and then we'll be able to control Afghanistan through him after the war. Okay. Later on, Hekmatyar got onto the State Department's list of international terrorists. So that's how well that one worked out. But that wasn't a deliberate, that doesn't fit into the Frankenstein Syndrome, even though it's been referred to as, oh, we created the Frankenstein, because that wasn't our deliberate policy. We didn't pick Hekmatyar and say, he's the guy we're going with, we'll use him. we gave our money to Pakistan and they picked them for Pakistani political reasons. Anyway, after the Soviets left, Hekmatyar, who was also a horrible, disgusting person, he kept on fighting with everybody else, and the Pakistanis eventually said, now we're not going to control them. Now, these two maps here are very, very, very important. And I told you I'm a map guy, so bear with me. So on the left, you see Afghanistan, different colors. There are different groups. It's not a one homogeneous country. You have Pashtun, you have Hazara, you have Turkmen, you have Uzbeks, you have Kyrgyz, you have Tajiks. The largest single group in Afghanistan are the Pashtun, which make up about 42%. And it's that light green in the left-hand map, the light green in sort of the southern central part of the country. Now, what's important is look at that map and then look at the map on the right that shows Afghanistan and Pakistan together, and you will see that in that map, the Pashtu are the beige yellow, and they drift over the border. You have Pashtu in Pakistan and Pashtu in Afghanistan. And part of the strategy of Pakistan was, we're going to use the ties between Pakistani Pashtu and Afghani Pashtu to control Afghanistan. That was their whole point. So it didn't work out with Hekmatyar. After the war with the Soviets, there were millions of refugees from Afghanistan in Pakistan. There were also over 1 million refugees in Iran, but they were different groups. But a majority of the refugees in Pakistan from Afghanistan were Pashtun, and they were in these huge camps. The Saudis were sponsoring madrasas, which are religious schools, in the camps, and they were spreading their own version of Islam, which is a very rigid, a very austere version of Islam. Now, there's a little bit of Frankenstein going on here, because the Saudis teach a very austere version of Islam, and yet the Saudi leadership are about as unaustere as you could possibly imagine, with Rolls Royces and huge palaces and flying off, these very religious people flying off to Lebanon, where they can spend a weekend drinking in bars and listening to Western music, and then come back to Saudi Arabia and say, oh, aren't we super religious and pious? But they were teaching this ideology / religion of theirs in the madrasas and creating thousands and thousands and thousands of refugees with this new ideology. And the Pakistani ISI, their equivalent of the CIA, began organizing these students from the madrasas who were indoctrinated with this strict Muslim ideology, and created a fighting force out of them, which became known as the Taliban. The word Taliban means students. They were the students from the madrasas. And then after the Soviets left, there was total chaos in Afghanistan. The Pakistanis had given up on Hekmatyar because he was going off in his own direction. And eventually the Pakistanis armed and trained the Taliban and sent them into Afghanistan, and they took over practically the whole country, pushing all of the drug dealers out of the way, pushing all of the different rival ideological groups out of the way, the rival religious groups out of the way. And at first, in the early 1990s, they were welcomed as saviors because there was utter and total chaos, constant fighting, constant anarchy. And at least for a year or two, they stopped the anarchy and got rid of all of these other criminals and militias and ideological groups. And it was only after that that they started to impose their own ideology. Now, and a lot of Afghanis, even very conservative, very pious Afghanis, did not like the extreme form that the Taliban have. But one of the things that's misunderstood by Americans as well, is that even though the Taliban is very much an Islamist party, very much a reactionary Islamist party, they're also a nationalist party. They are Pashtun nationalists. So one of the things that happened after the Taliban got strong and established is some groups associated with the Taliban started organizing Taliban groups in the Pashtun part of Pakistan. And they started conducting military and terrorist activities against the Pakistani military and against economic projects in Pakistan, because they didn't want to be controlled by Pakistan. They weren't there to serve Pakistan. They were there to spread their own ideology, and also as a Pashtun national group that, among other things, in Pakistan said, the Pashtun are Pashtu, not Pakistani. So we don't have to listen to the Pakistanis. And in fact, they're our enemies. So the Pakistanis, in their second attempt to control Afghanistan and what goes on in Afghanistan, created a group that also fights against Pakistan's interests. Now, it's a little more confusing than that, because sometimes there is cooperation between Pakistan and the Taliban government that is reestablishing itself now. And there are certain things that they have in common, certain goals they have in common. But the Taliban government is refusing to stop harboring Pakistani Taliban who are attacking Pakistani interests, who will retreat into Afghanistan when they're being chased by the Pakistani military. So it's starting to backfire on Pakistan, the creation of the Taliban, which they thought would be an instrument for them to influence the politics and the policies of Afghanistan. So there you have a third example of the Frankenstein
Oh my God.
syndrome.
If only Frankenstein were so kind.
Yes.
I
So-
mean, David, I love how you weave this into Frankenstein and syndrome and the monster. A lot of people don't realize that the creator was Dr. Frankenstein.
Right.
And the monster was we think of the monster as Frankenstein.
Yeah, the monster was Charlie or something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no name for the monster.
Right.
people-
No, just
Right.
yeah, the movie people, the publicity people called them the monster. And
Right.
But which brings me to something you said earlier, if I can, and then let's go around the room, and Madeline, maybe these thank you. But let's go around the room. But I have a question, David.
Yeah.
You were taken to, you were in Peru, and you were taken to some place in Cusco or Lima.
Cusco.
Yeah, Cusco, right. And you were given a leaf, and you were chewing on it, and it was good for
Altitude sickness.
the toothache and altitude sickness, all that, it had some immediate results. That's my point. It had some immediate result. But I chuckled at that. And I realized that this is something that's probably been going on for millennium, perhaps. But I chuckled at it because I recognized the disparity between this immediate result that you're getting and the drug cartels. And I wondered if this is not just a sample.
Oh, no.
You follow
No,
me?
yeah, I follow you, but the tea, it was tea actually that we were given. It was coca tea, and you can see the coca leaves in there. But if you had coca tea every day of your life, you would not develop a cocaine addiction.
Right.
Okay.
But
It
my
is-
point is this a sample like you get in, when you walk through used to be you walk through a Macy's and they'd spray you with perfume and you get it,
Yeah.
or you go into a chocolate
Mhm.
store and they give you a little piece, or that kind of thing. I wondered if that was that.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think it
all
was.
we know is to do it.
I think it was really, people do suffer from altitude sickness if they've never been up there, especially.
Oh,
if you're
definitely.
not-
Yeah.
and they don't want you to be sick in the hotel. They're looking after you, and in that part of the world, it's like the most natural thing to do.
Right.
They're not going to lure anybody into cocaine.
Okay,
addiction.
that's
It's
fair.
Already.
That's my question. One more
prone to
question,
do
and then
that.
let's go around the room. And the thing about Jen Psaki, who is the press secretary for the White House right now, is that she goes around the room and everybody gets to ask a question and then follow up.
Right.
And then, but the difference between there and here is we get to go around the room as often as we want. Right?
Yes.
There's no end to this. So one follow up, and then let's go around the room. And do you? The idea of policy and foreign policy is such a term, a phrase that seems to me a cloak. The idea that we have any kind of international policy seems to me a cloak, because we can go to the idea that our policy doesn't allow us to do this, but what is our foreign policy relative to Afghanistan, relative to the drug cartel, relative to anything? The policy, and you, Mr. Doctor, you can speak to this. The idea of policy. Why is it? Do we actually have policies, or is it just something that we just claim to have and then disregard when it suits our needs?
It's hard to know where to enter this circle. We certainly do have policies. Of course, the main policies that any country is going to have, and these are countries with good policies or bad policies. A country has to have a policy that is meant to protect its interests or to promote its interests. But you can have a policy of enlightened self-interest. So, for an example, I have always thought that one of the most brilliant moments in American foreign policy, when it was done almost exactly right, there are things you can criticize at the margin, was the Marshall Plan after World War II.
Right.
Okay, the Marshall Plan after World War II was based on several things. Part of it was based on a fear of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union after World War II was the only other major power that was kind of still on its feet, and even they were not in that great shape. But they had troops in Poland and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria and Eastern Germany and Eastern Austria. And we were deathly afraid that they might want to penetrate further into Western Europe. We didn't want that to happen. And we were also afraid because after World War II, in France, for example, the largest single political party in France after World War II was the Communist Party. It wasn't a majority, but it was larger than any other single party. In Italy, the second largest party of any party was the Communist Party. Not a majority, but they were big. And so in order to make sure that the Soviet Union didn't advance into Western Europe, or that communists would not continue to grow as parties in countries like Italy or in France, we had to get Europe back on its feet as quickly as possible so that they could help defend themselves. We were going to defend them because we kept our troops there, but they had to get going. And part of it was also, if we didn't help rebuild the economies, if people didn't get their jobs back, if the infrastructure didn't work, if the roads didn't work, if the trains didn't work, if the factories didn't work, people would have no reason to support the status quo. They wouldn't be vested in it, and they would be looking for radical solutions that the communists seem to offer. So for that reason, we needed to get Europe back on its feet. Second, we had, by the end of World War II, between 14 and 16 million Americans in uniform. And almost all of them were going to be demobilized. And when they were demobilized, they had to come back and they had to have jobs. And there was pent up consumer demand in the United States. You know, all of the car factories that had been converted to make war material, etc. There was a demand for cars, but our biggest trading partner before the war was Europe. If we didn't have those markets, we couldn't put all of those returning soldiers back to work. So we also wanted to rebuild Europe as quickly as possible in order to get those markets back as quickly as possible, in order to make the transition from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy much smoother. Because even after World War I, there were riots, there were protests because of the disruption. That's two. Three, we are basically good people. We saw the refugees, the displaced people, the destruction in Europe, and we wanted to help. So all of those things went together to actually create a coherent policy. Part of our policy was also a demand that we've got bags of money, guys, you Europeans, and we're perfectly willing to give you some of these bags of money, but the condition is you've got to show us that you, different European countries, are going to cooperate in rebuilding Europe. And that actually laid the foundations for the European Union, because the first thing that was created because of our demand was the European Coal and Steel Community, which was like the first building block of the European Union.
Yeah.
Brilliant policy,
Right.
absolutely brilliant. And it helped people. It helped us, it helped Europe, and it was the right thing to do.
Right.
So it can happen.
Right. So my point, I guess, is that the idea of a policy differs depending on who's in charge and when the policy, in air quotes, is going to be taking effect. So a policy that may have worked well in terms of what we think of something that is consistent is not going to work well today.
Right.
All right. So the consistency in terms of the word policy doesn't seem to exist.
Yeah, and there's a problem with that. There's a problem with that in a relatively democratic republic. A political scientist, Howard Wiarda, wrote about the problem, and one of the things that he pointed out was that the American public in general can be, in terms of foreign policy. First of all, in terms of foreign policy, Americans are woefully ignorant about the world. That's just the problem. But even given that,
That's our policy.
Well, it affects our policy, but you can roughly divide Americans, according to Wiarda, into three general groups regarding foreign policy. One group is a group he would call liberal interventionists. America should be ready to intervene in the world if human rights are violated, if an innocent country is attacked by a belligerent country, if people are in need, if there's a major natural disaster like that huge tsunami that hit the Indian Ocean in the early part of the 2000s. We should be ready to intervene on behalf of democracy, on behalf of human rights, on behalf of the well-being of countries. There's another group which he called conservative interventionists, who said, we should be ready to intervene. It's none of our business, human rights, democracy. We don't intervene for that. We intervene when there's a palpable threat to the interests of the United States. Then we should be ready to send troops overseas or somehow intervene, etc. Not to change countries, not to nation build, not to protect rights, but in order to forestall any attack or harm to the United States. And then there's a third group who are isolationists. We don't get involved no matter what. Anything outside our borders, none of our business. And so if the population is roughly divided into those three groups, and of course, who's in charge or who's more influential will shift from time to time, it's hard to have a coherent policy in a relatively democratic country that balances those out, because they don't balance. They're contradictory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we use the word. So all right, we could talk about the word policy for forever. Let's go to Mary, and then we're going to wind this up. And then after Mary, Marilyn, and then we're going to get close to the end here. Mary Wall.
Okay, couple of comments. China has been using loans to various countries, I guess, in order to, have economic influence over them.
Right.
The nature of wars, I see it has changed. It's no longer tanks, but cyber warfare, biological warfare, economic warfare. Pakistan is one of them, and Pakistan is a nuclear country. Like, there hasn't been basically Russia and Syria or Yemen or anything else like that. And personally, I think it's a darn good idea to get the heck out of Afghanistan.
I agree.
Possible, Israel and Palestine, whatever. Like, the world wasn't trying to calm that situation down. Staying there may have ended up escalating things. Russia's involved, China's involved in the Middle East. Like, they wouldn't find some sort of excuse. So that's one thing. And then as far as policy is concerned, like, basically, I guess ever since the World War II, the United States has been, in an economic, good time. Previous to that, it was Great Depression and stuff like that. And I guess, I perceive today's youth just a little bit, overconfident or something. That's always going to be the situation. In terms of, it's America's situation, I tend to perceive it, somewhat differently with regard to, I guess, being aggressive or assertive, maybe arrogant or whatever, anyway, in terms of policy, it's nice to be humanitarian and stuff like that, but alleging somehow that we're in charge of everything, I think, when we were fighting World War II, we're not at all sure we're going to win. No, even like soldiers that stormed Normandy, that they knew we were going to win the entire time. The sense of relief, basically at the end of World War II, seemed to produce this attitude that we were invincible. Well, that just might have changed. I guess, due to a lot, I guess, of technological advances and stuff that, I guess some people just don't perceive the actual position we're in, so whatever, finished.
Well, we have, China is becoming a much more active and aggressive actor on the world scene, and their interests are often at odds with ours. Although they're doing a lot of things that we used to do, and we are mad at them for doing things that we used to do ourselves.
That's not the only consideration.
Puts us in a, no, it's not the only situation, but big powers act in a certain way. There might be different nuances and differences at the margins, but big powers whether they're democratic or authoritarian or monarchical, tend to act in a certain way to spread their interest, to spread their influence.
Yeah, another perspective with regard to multinationals, many of which have more annual income than the government of Sweden.
Right.
Basically, and maybe the idea of Citizens United or whatever, like what is a politician, in regard to, I guess, social unrest supposed to do about it? Basically, if you attack, for example, Microsoft has no ability at retribution whatsoever. Basically, the only person that's going to solve, basically, the person that's in office or something. It's going to be no retribution society at all. In terms of, I guess, do this and do that, and be aggressive in this situation, be aggressive in that situation. But basically, maybe big oil doesn't maybe collude with big auto, or Hewlett Packard or anything, and there's, you start something, and even in terms of the existence of Citizens United, basically that a multinational corporation is that multinational, it's not American. How are you going to enforce it?
Well, that's something would have to be something that's done in an international way. I mean, that is one of the big problems now, is how do you get any kind of control, any kind of regulation on those things, and it can't be just the United States acting alone, or Japan acting alone, or the European Union acting alone. That has to be done internationally, and it's kind of hard to see how things like that can be regulated and brought under control. Although I think that they should be. I think that there should be means of regulating and taxing organizations like that, because they make millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and then they move it to places where they don't have to pay taxes. So they make it in America and move the money to Panama or to Cayman Islands.
Well, David, you're making the point of, we need the ability to globally tax, and that's something that maybe Karl Marx was even involved in. So let's go to Maryland. Let's thank you, Mary. Maryland, are you there?
Yes, I am. I have two issues, and I'd like to know what you think about them. The first one is on the Marshall Plan. I think another reason that we created the Marshall Plan, the reason we ended up in World War II was that after World War I, Germany had nothing. And so Hitler was able to rise because of that. And we weren't looking for a World War III. The second issue is, it seems to me that the Frankenstein Syndrome relates to our proxy wars, and relates to our backing groups that would overthrow dictators in places like South America, and then we end up with all the migrants here. And I'd like to know what you think about those.
Okay, your first point, I think, is well taken. That's one of the reasons why in the Marshall Plan, as I said, when we were giving billions of dollars in aid to Europe, we said, but we want you to come up with a plan of cooperation. And there was also an impetus from certain people in Europe to do this as well. And one of the main linchpins of the whole program was, how do you get France and Germany, who were the major combatants from the Franco-Prussian War to World War I to World War II, if you got them not only to cooperate, but even to integrate, you would create a situation where it would be much harder, if not impossible, for those two countries to go to war. And if you did that, you would sort of generally diffuse the likelihood of war in Western and Central Europe for a long time to come. So you're absolutely right. That was part of the plan, and there were specific elements in the plan to tie France and Germany together and then other countries around them precisely to prevent a World War III.
So the basic, I'm sorry. So the basic reason for the EU was actually us, because that started in the 50s.
We were a large impetus. Like I said, there were a group of people already, a group of men, Schumann and Jean Monnet, who all, and a couple of others who already had a plan to try and make some sort of like federalized Europe that would be so tightly integrated that war would be impossible. So it's like the United States was pushing from one end, and there were certain key politicians in Europe who were pushing from another end. But that was the purpose of the European Union, to try and create a situation which would make it virtually impossible for another war like that to break out. So, so you are absolutely right on that score.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn.
And the other one about our proxy wars and the dictators?
Right. The Frankenstein Syndrome is talking about a very, very specific subset of proxy wars. You know, most of the time a proxy war, and you're right, the Frankenstein Syndrome does sort of fit into that, but not every proxy war follows the Frankenstein model. But that's what it is. It's, you know, we can't be everywhere at once, but we're going to support Jonas Savimbi in Angola against the pro-Cuban MPLA. We're going to support the Contras against the Sandinistas. We're going to support this group against this dictator. And we're going to support this dictator against these smaller groups that are supported by the Soviets or the Chinese or whoever is the rival of the weak. So, but it is generally in that area that we found examples. Although the example of Bhindranwala in India, that wasn't a proxy war of the classic kind. That was more of an internal domestic inter-political party rivalry that went crazy. But I think you will find other examples of the Frankenstein syndrome in some of the proxy wars that we have gotten involved in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Marilyn, you have a question, a follow-up? Marilyn?
No, that was it.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Roger?
Yes, just a quote from NPR that knowledge is understanding that Frankenstein is not the monster. Wisdom is understanding that Frankenstein is the monster.
Okay, and I think I know where they're going with that, because you know, one of the things that I said in a lot of the talks that I gave using these is, when I'm referring to a group as a monster, I'm doing it as a metaphor based on Mary Shelley's novel of Frankenstein. Sometimes the people involved themselves are, you know, they're part of a larger group. Not every Punjabi Sikh is a follower of Bhindranwala. It's not a slam against Sikhs or against Punjabis, you know. So, but you take people who are out there and you manipulate them. You're also possibly exacerbating their bad points. But under other circumstances, they might not, it might not even be a group that you would ever occur to you is going to be a problem. So, you know, circumstances dictate, and despair is a easy thing for powerful people to manipulate. Not necessarily manipulate as well as they think they're going to manipulate it, but they will manipulate it.
The law of unintended consequences.
Yes, exactly. Well, the Frankenstein syndrome is sort of unintended consequences from the point of view of the people who create the specific strategy. that's not what they want. Sanjay Gandhi had no idea that this was going to end with the murder of his mother, whose interests he was trying to further. So, you know.
Right.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anyone? This is why I say we're different than what happens in the White House, because you know, the White House, one question, one follow-up, and they go around the room, and that's it, and then they walk out. Here, it's one question, one follow-up. We go around the room, a second question, a second, you know, there's no end until we basically run out of time based on our stated time. So I appreciate everybody for participating in our conversation tonight. And David, fantastic. Is one last call. This is why I say nobody leaves the room without the opportunity for speaking. 1, 2, 3. Okay, time's up.
No, Bud had his hand up.
Time's
I
up.
was gonna just give one quick anecdotal. If you've never had altitude sickness and it's awful, absolutely awful. And it gets
Okay.
progressively worse if you don't get off the mountain.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Jeanette.
Okay. Bud
All
had
right.
a question.
Well,
That's-
I don't have a question, but I'd like to offer a comment. I'm probably the oldest one in the group. I hitchhiked and bicycled through Europe in 1954, and the war, the fact that there had been a war was still evidence all over the place, and particularly in eastern France. I spent a night in a ditch in Metz, France one night. So, but it was interesting because that was in 1954. It was interesting because there was so much difference amongst the countries, and I think that Germany was so lucky to have had Adenauer at the end to step forward, because I think and you know, the guy was 90 years old before he left office. So, but the point is, the effect that the United States had, because the U.S. sector of Germany was in far better shape than the other sectors of Germany. Because I was in the military then in 1956, and I had a car, and I drove all over Europe at that point with my car, so I could see everything. In Austria, of course, it was still a divided nation. I was supposed to have had a great pass to get to Vienna, but I was in a guy's car, and I was going to Salzburg, but he was going to drive to Vienna. And I thought, oh boy, I could be in Vienna tonight. I'll just sit tight and he'll take me to Vienna. Well, I didn't have a great pass, so there was a danger because I had to go through the Russian sector. And we got halfway to Vienna, and well, no, a third of the way, he decided to have a drink. And so we stopped and well, it was full of Russian soldiers. Of course, I couldn't talk to the guy because he was a German, and he drove a Mercedes. He had leather gloves and whatnot. His nose was up here, but he was very nice. He bought me a Coke, and we didn't have to say anything to one another. It was it was full of Russian soldiers, so I couldn't open my mouth.
Yeah.
We got halfway there. We got stopped by a Russian soldier. He searched his car, and I know that he asked the driver about me, but I acted like I was asleep. He searched the glove compartment and banged it on my knee. But you know, it was just interesting. But even in Vienna, I can remember walking up to a Russian soldier and asked him if I could take his, if he would let me take his picture with him. Yet. So, but the point is, in 1992, the border came down, and so I drove to Berlin, went to visit my in-laws. And when you got across the border, I had been stationed in Fulda, and I could see into the Russian sector from out my billet's window. But I drove across then. I drove into the section, and the eastern section of Germany hadn't changed to what the western section had been back in 1954. This was all those years later, in 1992, when it opened up, and you could still see the puck marks and from where the machine guns. Anyway, I thought that might be interesting because we can be proud of what our nation did in the Marshall Plan, and even in Germany, there was a difference in the sectors between the American sector, the British sector, and the French sector, and it's easily observable. So, and that was a different day in America, of course. Anyway, that's it.
All right. Let's go to, look, we're over time right now, and what I want to do, and we've had so many opportunities to speak, but I want to give respect to David and to everybody who has to move on, and everybody who's been paying attention to this our great presentation for the last two hours. But let's take one more question, because I feel like, we could have been asking all this a long time ago. If you got something that spurred your mind, put it in the text messages, because we got to end this. Somebody's got to go to sleep. David, he's, look at his white long beard. He didn't get that because he's So one more question, and then we're going to end this.
Okay.
All right, let's go to.
Can I say something first?
Yes.
I am willing to stay for another 10 or 15 minutes even, but I really have to go to the bathroom.
Okay. All right.
So I will be right back.
David, thank you for saying that. Let's take two more questions, and we'll go to Linda and then Wanda. All right, Linda and then Wanda, and then we're Wanda it up. Linda.
Hi. Yes, I haven't been necessarily waiting to ask a question. I've just been listening to all the interesting ones, but it's my conviction that no meeting is complete until at least there's one stupid question. So I raised my hand. Anyway, I just wondered if it's just painfully obvious that the Pashtun Taliban ultimately would like to have their own nation carved out of the tan areas on the map of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and might be happy to let the other areas of Afghanistan go and continue to be tribal or separate from them. That may be painfully obvious. And the other thing I just wanted to push in there real quick is how up to our necks do you think the U.S. is right now in the covert operations and meddling in trying to bring about change from what is now existing in Afghanistan, to try to get back into a position where we can control it or put somebody more friendly to us in power. That's all. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Like any other place, the Pashtun are divided. There are some Pashtu who would like to remain part of Afghanistan like it was in the 70s before the Soviets even invaded. But the more radical Pashtu, etc., a lot of them, they would like Afghanistan to stay together, but to control all of Afghanistan, including the non-Pashtu parts. And I think the main part of the Taliban want that, even though their focus is still on the Pashto. But there are some Pashto who would like to see what is sometimes called a Pashtunistan, which would be take that part out of Pakistan, take that part out of Afghanistan, make your own country. So there's that. And the United States is going to be involved in covert operations. Some of them we would think, well, okay, that makes sense, and some of them not. You know, in Afghanistan, the Chinese have interests, the Indians have interests, the Iranians have interests, the Pakistanis have interests, the Russians still have interests, even though they don't have a border. They're very much involved in the former Soviet states there. And as long as all of those people have interests, we're going to be in there trying to make sure that, you know, the Chinese don't walk away with all of the natural resources, not that they have a lot aside from opium. But, you know, it's still got some strategic importance.
Yes, I see. Thank you.
All right. And the last one is from Wanda, please. Wanda.
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask the question because I'm curious if the Frankenstein example would fit what sort of happened to the Republican Party in the United States with the evangelical Christian, especially, I think was it today? I read it today. I don't know when it was said, but where Michael Flynn said we needed to be a country of one religion.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, I guess what religion he's talking about. And I was like, could the GOP be considered Dr. Frankenstein and the evangelical Christian movement be the sort of monster that's taken over the GOP?
Yeah. Yes, you're not the first person who has asked me that, and I have considered it, because the way that it would be is when the Tea Party first emerged, and it, you know, the Tea Party, from the Tea Party to the Trumpistas to the QAnon, it's not as direct a line as it looks. But nevertheless, when the Tea Party first came up, a lot of the mainstream Republican leadership were clearly thinking, this is a group we can use. This is a group we will harness, we will encourage them, and we will be able to use them to sort of give us a populist edge. And in the end, it turned out that the Tea Party sort of rebelled against the leadership of the Republican Party. So they're getting rid of people like Boehner and other of the conservative leadership, but the conservative mainstream leadership, they were throwing them out one after the other, you know. So, and finally, when it sort of transmogrified into what became the Trumpistas, you know, when Trump was one of the candidates in 2016, you know, before the primary started, everybody knew. I mean, it wasn't even something you questioned. Jeb Bush was going to be the Republican candidate for the Republican Party. I mean, hands down, it wasn't even a question. He was the first one out. And he was the first one out partly because of the Tea Party and the way they started. And he was Mr. Establishment Republican. And the other establishment Republicans were just pushed aside. Now they're trying, McConnell and all those others, the ones that didn't get pushed out earlier, are still trying to come back and find a way to use that Trumpista base, but it's not comfortable. So you could certainly look at that from the Tea Party on as a sort of Frankenstein's monster. Now, they didn't create the Tea Party, but when the Tea Party emerged, they certainly thought, oh yeah, we can use these people. We're the smart ones. We're going to be able to control them. And a lot of the smart ones got thrown to the side. So I'm not sure it exactly fits, but there are a lot of things in it that look like they fit.
Okay.
So, and like I said, you're not the first person to sort of draw that conclusion, which makes it kind of juicy, kind of interesting. Yeah, I'm going to have to look into that more.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, David, especially for, you know, your time, your expertise, and there's a reason we call you Schwami. So, yeah, you can look that word up. It actually has a meaning. It actually has a favorable meaning to what I'm trying to say. So we appreciate it. You know, we've gone like 25, 30 minutes over what we said we would go over. And I appreciate everybody's comments and questions and the discussion. But at this point, I think if Madeline is still with us, I'd like to ask Madeline to say it's time to end the conversation. And because we have been recording for, you know, as you know, for posterity. But at this point, we're going to end it. And David, thank you so much. Hope to see you this time. Oh, by the way, next time we meet, next time our Zoom conversations is going to be December 20, Monday, December 20th. And it's what we call the Human Rights Celebration, and where we celebrate, I guess, the humans.
Save the humans.
Save the humans. It's a human rights celebration.
Right.
So join us, and there's just a free for all. And bring your adult beverages. You know, this is the point where you can, you know, it's like a cocktail party only on Zoom, and we're gonna just have a little fun time together on Zoom. See how it works on Zoom. Thank you very much, David. I love everybody. You keep up the good work. Hope, and that's all I'm going to say. Good night.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye.